If you had 20 days to overland in the United States, where would you go?
The truth is that there is an infinite number of great overlanding destinations in the United States, and you don't have to pick just one. And for the next 3 months, we're going to be sharing with you all of the locations that we chose for our 20 days on the road. But how in the world did we choose these places? The truth is that this is what drove our entire trip.
A photo from more than 30 years ago of Bill and his friend Corey on the north rim of the Grand Canyon.
But how exactly do you start planning for an almost 4,900-mile journey?
So Bill tells me he wants to go back to the north rim of the Grand Canyon. So the question is, where do I go from here? Well, the first thing I need to do is I need to pull up some maps and try and figure out exactly where he wants to go, because that's the starting point of this entire thing. Paper maps are fine, they're going to give you an overview, but they're really not going to get into the detail that the electronic maps have today. So one of the first things I usually do is I'm going to pull it up in Gaia and OnX in one of those electronic resources so I can see where is it he wants to go. Is it reasonable that we even have time to drive out there? Because that's another factor. Do you have time? Can you get enough time off? In this case, we had 20 days that we could take. There was a government holiday. It just happened to work out really well. We left after work one day and got home literally right before work the last day. So it worked out. But that's where I'm starting is give me a map, let me see where we're going so I can look and say, hey, here's exactly where he wants to go and it's over here. And by the way, there are mountains there too. So we've got desert, we've got mountains. So what time of year do we want to go? That's another factor. You've got to choose the best time of year. And in this case, we had to balance it between the 100-degree temperatures of the desert and the possibility of snow in the mountains. And thankfully, leaving at the end of September and going to the first 2 weeks of October this year was perfect. Where are you going? What time of year are you going? What does the weather look like? How much time do you have? What's your budget? Your budget's going to drive whether you're camping, whether you're moteling it, whether you're Airbnb-ing it, whether you can go to those fancy places like, Under Canvas. We also went to a pretty cool rock lodge. Those are expensive. The cost of that rock lodge for 2 nights that we spent at was probably about half the cost of this entire 2-week vacation. So you've got to factor that in because you can go to Europe for a week if you want, or you can consider a budget like this instead and spend 20 days on the road. So what's your budget? After you've got a location, the next thing I'm looking for is a general route. I want to have a general route. Yes, you can go, you can do it on the fly, you can just figure it out when you get there, but you're probably going to miss some pretty cool stuff if you don't know what else is available in the area. You also want to make sure not to overplan though, because if you overplan every single moment of every single day on your vacation, you're going to miss out on all those awesome flexible opportunities that just pop up that you have no idea are going to happen. So in this particular case, I knew a little bit about the area from other YouTubers. So for example, we picked some main points of interest that we also wanted to go to. Places like Toquerville Falls, like the Barracks Trail, like White Pocket. Is the difficulty of the trails you're planning within your capability, your vehicle's capability and your capability? That's very important. Once we had all of that and a general route, you also want to make sure you know what the general resources in that area are. What's the camping availability? Is it dispersed? Is it somewhere where you need a permit in advance? Can you just show up last minute and pay to be there? Are there only KOAs for several hundred miles and you're stuck with that? Know what's available, know where the water resources are, know where you can get gas, know where you can get food. You also need to be aware of the regulations in the area. There was the place that we ended up on the North Rim required a permit in advance. You had to have your national park permit that you could not get at that entry. You had to get it somewhere else before you showed up in the middle of nowhere. You had to have your permit before you got there. You had to have your camping permit if you were staying overnight before you got there. Generally, you had to, I think, book at least 5 days in advance. You had to print out your permit before you left. You had to sign the second page of your permit. They asked to see the actual physical permit. Don't forget those regulations. Don't forget the photo regulations. National parks generally require an advance filming permit at a cost if you want to use it for anything that could be commercial. You will not see any video. In the next 3 months, you won't see any video from the national parks. You will see still photography from those national parks, but not video, because there are very different rules concerning what we can and can't use. Be flexible too. Don't overplan everything, like I said. Don't have every minute of every day booked. So Bill knew where he wanted to go. I looked at the map. We found some other points of interest in the area. And then it just so happened that we discovered that a group that we are affiliated with, Tri-State Overland, was going to be going to the Ozarks, which is something else we really wanted to do. So it just happened to add perfectly on to the beginning of this trip. And that made a huge difference too, because one of the other planning things you need to think about is, do you want to go with a big group? Do you want to go just by yourselves? Do you want a small group? Once you have that planning done, the next step is, how do we prepare? Do we have shelter? Yes, we have a rooftop tent. You can use a ground tent. You can use a mattress on the ground like we saw somebody doing in Colorado when we were there. Do you have a water source? We have a 14-gallon water tank that we were filling on a fairly regular basis by buying gallons of water at gas stations or other places and using a funnel to fill that. So make sure you've got water resources. Do you have enough fuel to get through where you need to be? We have an extra 2.5-gallon fuel can, as well as an extra 2.5 diesel can for our diesel heater. Do you have the things you need for cold weather, for hot weather, such as a diesel heater if it's going to be below freezing, extra blankets, layered clothing? Are you taking your rain gear because you may be going to the desert, but there's a lot of things that can happen between here and the desert and on the way back. Make sure you have your maps downloaded. Paper maps are great. I love the gazetteers. I love looking through them. Bill really loves looking through them. That's how he does most of his planning, but these downloaded maps are what get you on a turn-by-turn basis through your trails, know exactly where you're going the majority of the time. So that is something that is vital to make sure that you have those maps. Also communication. We have base radios, GMRS radios in both of our vehicles, as well as handhelds, so that if somebody doesn't have a radio or if somebody needs spotted from outside the vehicle, we can use those radios to make sure you have communication. How are you planning your food? Are you eating out every single time, or are you going to have a pre-planned menu, or are you just going to have a handful of stuff that you know mixes up into good meals and make it as you go? Make sure that you are prepared for emergencies, because things don't always go as planned. So make sure that, for example, we have recovery gear, we have first aid kits, we have an emergency beacon in one of the vehicles that vehicles are always together. We have additional fluids, coolant, oil, an additional belt, parts that break regularly on vehicles so that we had those in case we needed to change things. We also had basic tools so that if we needed to use those tools, we could use those tools. Keep in mind all of those things for emergency situations. Because when you start going on these trips, one of the biggest things that you need to make sure you carry with you throughout the entire trip is a good attitude and flexibility. Things are fluid, things are changing. You never know what's going to happen on a trip. It could be awesome, it could be better than you could ever imagine, or you could run into hurdles that you never saw coming. Hey, wow. There are a lot of these guys here, and I just looked down and suddenly I have this massive daddy long legs on my hand. I think I'm going to evict him. Do I want to know what you've done to this vehicle now?
No.
Well, we are now in Ozark, Arkansas. This is not where we expected it to be today.
Yeah. I handed the mechanic the sticker and he goes, "Now I know how you broke it."
Yeah, get your ass down here and learn how to do it.
So, Billa, what just happened?
I let the girl drive again.
Okay, so the first thing I have to say is this is supposed to be a green trail. It's not a green trail. For some reason is not charging it up to 100% during the day when we're driving. It's possible we just weren't driving enough, or it wasn't connected someday and it got way too low. It now won't run the fridge. I get the feeling that when they gave me an orthopedic boot for my broken, fractured, sprained, whatever it may be foot, that this is probably not what they expected it to do.
There, now at least I've got all the mud off of it. Now that you've done all that planning, preparation, and armed yourself with a positive attitude, now you're ready to drive the first mile on that overlanding trip. In our case, that first step was 200 miles to Big Bone Lick State Park, where we found camping in Kentucky for the night, followed by 270 miles the next day to Faro Campground, where you can enjoy walking through the Garden of the Gods in Illinois. The campground has 12 first-come, first-served campsites for $10 a night. And there's a moderate quarter-mile trail that will take you to the most scenic views in the Garden of the Gods recreation area. When Bill and I travel long distances cross-country, this is exactly the kind of place that we seek out on our route in order to break up those days and enjoy the beautiful world around us on the way out west. That evening found 7 rigs, 11 people, and 5 dogs, all relaxing around a campfire, talking about the 340-mile trip that we would need to make the next day to reach the Woolham Campground in the Ozarks. And just like that, the next day found 14 people, 6 dogs, and 9 rigs camped out along the Buffalo River, awaiting our adventure in the Ozarks the coming days.
Yes, hello.
Thanks so much for watching. And if you've enjoyed the video thus far, make sure to come back next week when we tackle the first day of the Ozark Overland Adventure Trail. I hope to see you then. But in the meantime, go out and find your own adventure.